What does it look like to be queer and Christian? There are many that would say the two are completely contradictory, and for various reasons. It's easy to find conservative Christian voices that say queer identity in itself is antithetical to the Christian faith.
Christians do not encourage sinners to come out as gay or trans in order to be quote-unquote missional. This is a mission that leads everybody to hell.
It's even possible to find more progressive voices that say Christianity is intrinsically homophobic.
And then you get all the other legs, like homophobia, transphobia. All of it stems from Christian supremacy.
Yet still, in the middle of all of these voices, there are thousands upon thousands of queer people who are drawn to the Christian faith. I myself am one of these people. This podcast is not a defense of queer Christianity, nor any specific sexual ethic or identity. I'm here to take you all on a journey, one that I have been on for the last decade, spurred on by a single question. For many of us, the queer Christian journey is marked by so many questions. Can I even be Christian? Does God approve of me as a gay person? Am I going to hell for simply being attracted to the same sex? Is queer identity labels okay to use? Can I get married? Who should I marry? What if I don't get married? Who can I have sex with? Every queer person who has spent any time around Christianity has asked these questions. Some of these questions are asked by queer people regardless of religious experience or upbringing. Ultimately, all of these questions revolve around identity, what language I may use, behavior, what do I do, and access, where can I belong? And I'm not downgrading any of these questions. They are all really important ones to process. Still, these questions speak to a greater problem within the American Christian Church and how it has handled formation, especially around sexuality. When we look at the church, adherence to a strict code of belief and behavior has been a major aspect. Beliefs and behaviors are important aspects of our life and the way we live out our faith, yet the church has often operated through policing behaviors and beliefs, devoid of compassion or inner examination. There is a hilarious SNL skit where Pedro Pascal plays a Latina mom, and as she talks about the possibility of her son having depression, she says,
He said, "Mommy, I'm depressed." Then I said, "Don't do that, do something else."
We laugh because we have been there. This is the sentiment so many of us have engaged in the church. Within the sexuality conversation, we have created a culture in the church that simply says, stop doing that. And this is not just with queer people, all of us. For straight people, this has been communicated through what has come to be known as purity culture. The idea that if you focus on abstinence from sex till marriage, then you will have great sex and can do whatever you want with your spouse. This is not a bad value in and of itself. Within the church, though, it has been engaged with little compassion for those who end up having sex before marriage and unrealistic expectations of sex for those who actually do wait. The reality is, this has left a devastating legacy of secret porn use, extramarital affairs, difficult sexual relationships within marriage, along with an overall lack of integrity throughout the church. Jay Stringer, a licensed mental health therapist and ordained minister who authored the book Unwanted, How Sexual Brokenness Reveals Our Way to Healing, explains it this way in an interview he did for a video series called Christian Sexuality.
We are overwhelmed in this world with sexual content and sexual brokenness. But then when you begin to say, what is the Christian solution to these problems? What you get is something that I just refer to as lust management. And lust management is essentially, this is the bounce your eyes if you're having a lustful thought about someone that you find attractive. Some people go as far as, slapping rubber bands around their wrist. So it's basically this suppression that if anything of sexual desire comes up, I need to suppress it. I just need to get away from it. I need to run from it. I need to ignore it.
When I heard it put this way by Jay Stringer, it helped me connect multiple dots. We as the church have grasped for control, even as we fail to engage the heart of the issue. For gay people, it has been even worse. There's a great song from the popular Broadway musical called The Book of Mormon that summarizes this mentality of the church for gay people.
When you start to get confused because of thoughts in your head, don't feel those feelings. Hold them in instead.
Sure, it's commenting on a Mormon context, but I believe the song strongly reveals a similar mindset that appears in Trinitarian Christian communities. The song is called Turn It Off.
Treat those pesky feelings like a reading light and turn them off.
Churches have struggled to even acknowledge that gay people exist. When their existence has been acknowledged, the common response has been judgment, erasure, or even conversion therapy. This is why so much of the queer Christian experience has had to focus on deciphering if we even have a place in the church. Then, when we figure out that we have a place, we spend so much time defending that place and even figuring out what it looks like. All of this as we try to simply embark on the spiritual journey that every person takes. In my own journey, though, I found myself at a crossroads about 6 years ago. I had been on this journey for many years already at this point, and realized I had come to comfortable answers to a lot of the questions I mentioned before. I feel like I had arrived somewhere where the ground wasn't going to get swept from under my feet, at least on these topics. And it begged the question, what's next? Have I figured out life as a queer Christian? Obviously, the answer to that was no. So what comes next? There had to be more. And this is what started the journey that led me to this podcast and the topic of spiritual formation, a word that I had not contemplated much up to that point. So if you're willing, I would love for you to join me as we ask the question together. What does it look like to be spiritually formed as a queer person who follows Christ?
Got no desire for a woman. I'm so damn scared to live alone. I think I'm running out of options. When will my house become a home? God, will I ever walk that aisle and bear the children I have dreamed? Or will I die alone and holy? It's not as easy as it seemed, or when I was but just a child. I had so many distant plans. I swore I'd marry sometime early instead of lusting for some man. I hope to sing to sleepless children, enjoy my wife and hold her hand instead of screaming at the ceiling. Jesus, I don't understand.
So I feel like I need to give you a little bit more context before we jump right into this. First of all, if you're wondering, who is this who's talking? Hi, my name is Josh Proctor. I am a spiritual director. I have a practice called Holy Ourselves. I am also a pastor at my local church called Providencia. Along with that, I am a podcaster, and I do consulting on LGBT care and inclusion within the church, especially churches which hold to a traditional sexual ethic, meaning they still hold marriage as between a man and a woman. I explained to you the personal origins of this project, and I will share more about that in a bit. But there is another origin of this project, which is that 6 years ago, I began pursuing my Doctor of Ministry degree. It started with a much different thesis, but ended with what you are listening to today. Before we go further, there is one term I think it is important for me to define and clarify. You have already heard it mentioned multiple times here so far, and you will hear it a lot throughout this series. It's the term queer. I am using it here because it is the best umbrella term to encompass everyone within the LGBT spectrum of identity and within the community. Even as a gay person, this term may be abrupt because of its history of being used in a derogatory way, maybe even your history with the term. It has a complicated history, yes, but it has come to be redeemed in many ways by the LGBT community and is used widely within LGBT conversation, which is why I have found it to be the best term to use here. If you are a pastor of a church that holds a traditional sexual ethic, I want to acknowledge that you may have a lot of questions right now, and you may even feel uncomfortable as you listen, and that is okay and totally understandable. This podcast is not about trying to convince you to change your beliefs. This podcast is part of my final project for my Doctor of Ministry thesis, exploring how churches, especially churches holding to a traditional sexual ethic, can walk alongside all LGBT Christians in their spiritual formation. My hope is that through this podcast, you may find a route forward to walk alongside LGBT Christians in their spiritual walk, regardless of their beliefs upon marriage or sexuality. But I can promise you one thing. If you're willing to continue listening, it is going to be a journey of humility for you. And if you listen and really listen, you may even find that this is not just a route for queer people, but for yourself as well. On the other side, if you're a queer person, you may feel all kind of things right now. Excitement, nervousness, ambivalence, whatever. I want to assure you that this podcast is for you. It is for us. I wanted to make this podcast directly for queer people because for the most part, most of us, we don't have a church that feels like a viable guide for us in our formation. We are often on this on our own. And I hope that if that is you, this can provide a vision forward for you in your spiritual growth. Over the past 6 years, I have been researching, interviewing scholars, and conducting case studies. You will be hearing a lot about all of that, as well as probably some clips from it as we go forward. This is a 7-part series, exploring where it all led me. The biggest chunk of this series is going to be a set of conversations I did with my dear friend and colleague, Sarah Claire Smith Colling. 2 years ago, I got to interview Sarah Claire for an episode I did on the Life on Side B podcast. I know that your technical title is not pastor, but I still count you as one of my pastors.
That's so nice. I count you as one of my pastors too.
Aww.
So I totally get that sentiment.
Sarah Claire is, what is your actual title at Prof?
Soul Care Director.
Soul Care Director, and also a counselor.
The director of the Soul Care.
And now Sarah Claire is interviewing me. We have worked together on staff at our church, but more than that, we are in community together. This is the first part of that interview.
Well, first of all, I'm a friend of Josh, which is wonderful. So I'm grateful for that. My name is Sarah Claire, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor. And I have worked in the church space for the last, let's say, 8 years, which is something I didn't fully intend on, but really came into my life in a beautiful way. And so I've been able to kind of serve in this way of the intersection between psychology and counseling and trauma-informed care within spiritual communities, which has been really special. And I have my own practice. I work with attachment trauma. A lot of attachment trauma work is what I do. So I'm a trauma therapist. And I'm just really excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
It's so funny because I feel like this is just such a moment because I recently was having to listen to that other interview we did a few years ago over there.
Yes.
and just now being here. It's crazy.
Yeah. Also, we were like brand new to each other then.
We were really brand new to
but
each
it
other.
felt like we weren't, which was cool.
Yeah.
And now we have more years of like relationship kind of with each other. And
exactly.
But it's very cool to be doing this.
So I'm honored for you to like help me with this.
I feel really honored you asked me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I get to learn alongside you and grow in this way with you.
Yeah.
And this whole project is very special.
Thank you. I can't believe it's at this point, but here we are.
Here we are.
And I was listening to the last interview we did, and there was just such a dynamic of it. And I was like, when I was trying to figure out how this project was going to be, I was just like, yeah, that felt good.
Yeah. Very alive.
Yeah. So here we are.
Here we are. Okay, Josh, are you ready to tell us? First question is, what led you to this project?
Okay.
So give us a little background of what kind of spurred you into this.
Yeah. It's so funny because when I started my doctorate, my professors were like, be prepared to change your topic. And I was like, that won't happen. And then it's happened.
They were right.
Because I think I started working on like LGBT youth experiences in the church or something. It was very like multiple different things. But I think ultimately what led me to this was it really rooted in my own experience of getting to a place where I had kind of felt comfortable about what I believed around being queer and Christian, around identity. I was kind of finding an understanding of grounding of what my family would generally look like. A lot of these questions that I feel like queer Christians, it's so much of what we have to think through because no one else has the answer. So we just have to figure it out. And I got to this place of like, okay, like what comes next? What do I do? And like, am I done? But I was like, this definitely does not feel like done, you know? So I just started exploring what does it look like to go deeper.
Ooh, yeah.
And like, and I remember, I do remember reading The Velvet Rage by Alan Downs. And around the same time, I was reading Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzero. And there were multiple times where they were saying the same thing.
Wow.
And I was like, you know, Pete Scazzero talks about the wall and Alan Downs was talking about the dark night of the soul. And I'm like, wait, like for anyone who doesn't know Velvet Rage, Alan Downs is a gay psychologist and he was talking about the experiences of shame and gay men and everything. And Pete Scazzero in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality is really talking about what does it look like to have emotionally informed spiritual formation that deals with your emotions, engages you as a holistic person. And so they're talking to completely different audiences. And I think that those two books, because I remember reading them around the same time, and I was like, so where's like the overlap?
Yeah.
That is where it felt like then this question kind of started rumbling and all of it
was birthed.
Yeah.
Yeah. That crossover.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now give us a little bit of a definition or information about what is spiritual formation.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, I thought it was going to be such an easy question.
Yeah.
Because
that's easy to define.
Right. Yeah.
But maybe less easy.
It really was because I had to do a presentation for in this program that I was doing. You had to do multiple presentations on like the biblical theological foundation and the sociological cultural foundations.
Christian spirituality is ultimately the lived experience of God. We're not talking about theology, what we believe, or the doctrines, but that lived out understanding of our experience.
When I got to the biblical theological, I was like, okay, I need to define spiritual formation. And at the time, I defined it as
practices and disciplines aimed to deepen that lived relationship with God and foster spiritual growth.
And I was like, it felt good. And people in my in my presentation, you know, seemed to agree with that. And then I interviewed Sarah Patterson, who is a spiritual director. I had met her, and at the time I didn't know a lot of spiritual directors. I was very new to spiritual direction at the moment. So I was like, I would love to talk to you about my project. And she was like, that's great, but I actually think you're missing a really important part.
There for me is, and I'm not sure everyone would agree with this, so I can only speak for me. There's formation that occurs almost immediately when we're born, just because of where we're born and who we're born to, how how we're born, whether we're wanted or not. And there are all these formative forces at play, at work, for both our good and for sometimes our malformation, that we don't even become aware of until we even see ourselves as clay, I suppose, of a kind.
And she then helped me to understand that spiritual formation specifically isn't just your intentional work. It's not just what you do from the moment you become a Christian. You're formed from the moment you're born, the church you grow up in, the culture that you are in, the language that you speak, all of these things, you're being formed, whether intentionally or
whether
unintentionally.
you choose it or not.
Whether you choose it or not. And until you can understand how you've been formed to this point, you can't really go anywhere. And when she had, I still remember that conversation because I had already known, of course, that like, yeah, we're formed, like, but thinking about it in spiritual formation aspects, because I think, you know, we have so many times in the church where we have discipleship programs and we have these like classes and all these things, but I feel like we don't really take into account very often that people who are coming in have already been formed.
Yeah, they're not starting at zero.
No, they're not starting at zero, but we take it as if we're dealing with people at point zero.
Yeah.
And so being able to go, no, so these movements, like these ways of being formed have to connect with how we've already been formed. And if we aren't taking that into account, then like there's nowhere forward. And so I think, Sarah, if you're listening, thank you so much.
Thank you, girl. Yeah.
That was really forming for me to be able to do it. And so kind of some of the ways that I started from there to talk about spiritual formation was actually, I like to talk about spiritual formation as more than. So spiritual formation is more than your beliefs and your behaviors. Yes. You know, it's more than just what you understand in ideas and intellect. It's more than what you do. It's like a new form of being, kind of like shaping your being. So I want to step in here and give a little bit more context for this point. The statement, spiritual formation is more than beliefs and behaviors, can easily be categorized within the common Protestant conversation around what is called grace and works. But that is not what I am referring to here. When we talk about grace and works in church, we are engaging with the question of what saves us from hell. Is it some kind of mercy of God, completely unrelated to our actions which keep us from hell? Or do our actions play a part in determining our eternal destination? We are constantly caught up with this question. As queer people, we have long heard the message, gay people are going to hell, which naturally ingrained in us a fear to avoid that at all costs, or it makes us apathetic as a wall of safety to avoid it altogether. When I say spiritual formation is more than beliefs and behaviors, I'm not talking about what we are saved from, but what we are saved into. I'm saying that more than beliefs and behaviors, this spiritual journey is about becoming something new. When we focus on trying to get out of hell or simply get into heaven, our spirituality becomes transactional or passive. We are either working hard to behave well in order to cash in on an entry ticket to heaven, or we can get hyper-focused to make sure our beliefs are correct, worried that one wrong belief will send us to hell. Often as queer people, we can get burned out by the need to behave and believe that we simply want to be able to exist, something that we rarely get the chance to do. The perspective of the spiritual journey as a process of becoming is not about becoming more worthy, and it's not a new task list for us to accomplish. It is actually the process of learning to exist more holistically. Kind of like what I was talking about before, it's more than your life going forward from this point. And I think that the thing that really hit me with that was that the Bible even shows this. Like, the Bible could have been a way of just showing theological ideas and behavior points, but instead it's a story. And it's a story that takes of people
moving
thousands of years before
being
Jesus
formed.
even comes on the scene. And so the idea is that to know Jesus And to know Jesus' place in your life means you need to know these thousands of years of story before he even comes on the plate, on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's true of the salvation story, like how much more is that important for our own lives? Like, this is why I'm always like, the Old Testament, it's so important because it lays this groundwork that Jesus is like, I'm playing into this story.
Yes.
I'm not creating just something out of the blue. So again, that was a really big point. And then I think another one was that it's more than steps to take. There's a book called Invitation to a Journey, a Roadmap for Spiritual Formation by Robert Mulholland. I feel like I'm mispronouncing his name, and so sorry if I am. Anyway, his quote is, "This means that our spiritual journey is not our setting out by gathering information and applying it correctly to find God as an object out there to be grasped or controlled by us. It is a journey of learning to yield ourselves to God and discovering where God will take us." And so there's so much of what I learned is like, it's not things I do, though that's important, but it's this like invitation of openness to be formed. Like
inner formation, not just outer works.
Exactly. So yeah, there's so much there.
So good. In Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, he talks about the going back to go forward.
Yes.
Like, so that's another a movement, like you're saying, a step into the past to go into the future.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And also just the understanding of, like, one of the big theological understandings I came to really understand was like the link between knowing myself and knowing God.
Yes. Oh man.
St. Augustine
Talk
has
about
something about it. Yeah.
Yes.
Like, if I'm made in the image of God, then to know God and to seek God is to then learn more about myself, and vice versa. To learn more about myself.
Yes, it's circular.
It's circular. The two are connected, because if I try to understand myself apart from God, I'm going to create a false self-understanding, something that is not there. But at the same time, to try and understand God as something completely devoid of my own self is not
that
just
also doesn't work.
It doesn't work. The two are interconnected, and I think God meant for that to be when he made us
spiritual beings
in this divine image.
So good.
That is so interconnected. And so then it becomes this invitation for God to form us into who we actually like are. Yeah.
Gorgeous.
So you may hear this last part and feel a little bit hesitant. If so, that is okay. And because of that, I want to take a little bit more to engage with this here. This whole concept is something we can often overlook, yet I have also found it to be vitally important in the process. The concept that humans are made in the image of God is a foundational belief within Christianity. It is so fundamental, so foundational, that in many ways it has laid the groundwork for modern concepts of human rights and human dignity. It's that important. There's something about humans that seems to reflect the divine face of God. And I would say we probably all agree on that. Within the LGBT context, gay and trans people constantly internalize from church messaging that they do not reflect the image of God. It's not even often simply about their sexuality or their gender identity. There is a general feeling that they just do not bear that image. Therefore, I found it necessary when working with case studies to make the connection between knowing God and knowing self. It helps reestablish the understanding of what it means to be made in the image of God. We often don't think about the implication of this. John Mark Comer, author of the book Practicing the Way, explains how this impacts spiritual formation this way in a sermon he gave.
As you walk down that path, ironically, you don't become like, a clone where like you drink the Kool-Aid, you wear the white jumper, and like, you know what I'm saying? You actually become more unique, not less. right? You actually become more your real true self. You stop getting sucked into the stereotypes of our city, which is everybody has to be unique, which means nobody is really unique because we all have weird hair and we all have tattoos and piercings and like, we're so unique. Yeah, but when everybody's unique, nobody's unique, right? You just get sucked in to the same advertisement. But actually, as you follow Jesus, as you become more like Jesus, you become more your real true self, the best version of who God thought you up to be. As you become more Jesus-ier, you become more you-ier. I know that's not a word. All you educators in the room, I'm sorry, but...
Now, the hesitation you are feeling, if you are feeling it, probably arises when we come to the conclusion of this theology of the image of God for spiritual formation. It's the implication that if I am made in the image of God, then knowing God and knowing myself are eternally linked. And I would also add knowing other people who are also made in that same image. You may worry that this leads to the risk of creating our view of God to reflect ourselves. And we're actually going to talk about that in one of the later episodes. The reality is, that is the point that is important for now, is each of us naturally live by a false image of God already. Each of us does. It is often developed from our context rather than rooted in God's true character. And we are often oblivious to it. But knowing ourselves actually allows us to reveal our false ideas of God and instead know God for who he truly is.
Okay, so take us into, so much of this work that you're going to lay out for us is about movements, like you're talking. Mm-hmm. So if you could give us a little, what are the spiritual movements? Or like maybe not even just the ones that you're going to tell us about, but what does that mean, a spiritual movement?
I got the idea of spiritual movements from Henri Nouwen. I was trying to use a lot. I don't only use resources in this from people who are LGBT or same-sex attracted, but I really tried to use that a lot. So Henri Nouwen became a very important one. And I did his Introduction to Spiritual Formation book, and he talks about these movements as kind of like a breathing process of like how you ebb and flow with the spirit.
Yes.
That these movements are ways that we are throughout our entire life moving away from something and into something. That there's like polar sides to it, but it's not something I complete like in a year. We will always be moving in these directions. And so he, in his book, and throughout a lot of his works, talks about these different spiritual movements, these ways that we are walking on a journey away from some of the movements I use, and actually I took from him. So like movement from sorrow to joy, the movement from resentment to gratitude. He has a different name for it, but the movement from murkiness to transparency, about how we see God and how we engage with God. A lot of these come from his work that I picked up, and I just found it so helpful to be able to see this as these are different threads of the cord that as we're going through, and like how they weave into our journey with Christ and our journey with ourselves and each other and all of these things. And so like I tried to, the funny part is I tried to stick away from a order of the movements, but yet I had to come and accept that there is still
there is some sort of order here.
There's ones that we naturally, the way I like to put it now, after going through all of this, was they're not in order in the sense that you go through one and you complete it and then you go to the next one. So like shame to dignity. I don't get rid of all of my shame and then I'm going to move into dealing with sorrow. No, that never happens. You're always going to come back to it. There's always more shame to deal with. There's always more sorrow to deal with, all of these things. But even as we're walking through all of these movements at the exact same time, some are much more glaringly in our face at times than others. And so I think that what I found was there are what I would say earlier movements that become much more prominent earlier on the journey, that we see them. They are like right in front of our face. They're yelling for our attention, while other ones are still in the background.
Yeah. And you almost can't get to the latter ones, but without having to truly go through those first.
Yeah. Without at least like doing that initial work in them.
That's right.
Because then the other ones are like come up. And then I think the last movement, like we'll get into all of them, but the last movement, isolation and intimacy, I think I really found that not only what I say is a later movement, but almost like a culmination movement, because I found so many, ultimately that's like what the gospel's about.
Yes.
Finding intimacy, finding this connection. And so in many ways, I almost found it as like a, later but culminating movement of, as I'm doing all of this work, it will bring me into intimacy, and it's going to lead in that way. So I kind of put them into 3 groups: early movements, which included shame to dignity, murkiness to transparency, and sorrow to joy. And then also middle movements, resentment to gratitude, and entitlement to humility. And then the later movement, which would be isolation and intimacy. So the way is that kind of almost in a pyramid kind of way, that we're dealing with this foundational work. And again, it will still always be there. It'll still come up. But then that leads us to then be able to engage with resentment and entitlement and these kind of avenues, and then ultimately bring us into connection of intimacy. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, as you're saying, you will return to some of them again and again, but the more you're familiar with the movements. And then my next question is about spiritual practices that are attached to the movements. So as you return to them, now you're also attaching a practice with how you live through these movements.
Yes.
Right. So if you could even share a little bit about why you included the spiritual practices attached to the movements?
Yeah. For me, I'll be honest, especially I'm still learning in it, but I have not been great with spiritual practices in my life. And not even from a shame way. It's just like, it's just not been part of my rhythm. But through this journey, I have found, first of all, a new way of looking at them, not even as practices, but as rhythms of how I go about my life. And kind of in that way of, rather than it being tasks or steps to take, about kind of reorientation of the way I'm walking, the pace at which I'm walking, changing the pace and stuff. And so I think that with the spiritual practices, I first thought about it when I was reading Deeply Formed Life by Rich Villodas, because what he would do is he would take different sections of the spiritual journey, and then he would have a follow-up chapter where he would engage specifically with spiritual practices or things that would help form that. And I found that to be such a great format, because ultimately we are physical embodied creatures, and we need to know, okay, cool, this is a great concept.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Now, how do I live it?
Yeah. And so being able to give some tangible ways of how do I go about this? How do I take steps forward in the movement? I thought was really helpful.
Oh, yeah.
And then I think with that, kind of what I wanted to do was, I've learned so much more about how faith is meant to include both all 3, our hands, our hearts, and our heads. We need to be able to understand. We need to be motivated by our desires, but then we also need to use our hands in our spirituality. We need to use our bodies in our spirituality. And I really wanted to try, and rather than come up with new practices, come up with new things, take practices within spirituality, but especially within Christian faith, that maybe sometimes we don't connect very often to these things. But for instance, like we're going to talk a lot about coming out, and how confession and coming out, they're related. We're so used to confession being going before a priest, or like, I'm going to tell you all the bad things I did. But confession, if we can get to the root of what confession is coming before a person and allowing yourself to be known, to be seen, the scary parts of you, the things that just seem like no one can see that, and allow for it to be seen. If we understand that that's the root of the spiritual practice of confession, well, now we can apply it in so many ways. Because I think as we see the heart of Jesus is constantly in the Sermon on the Mount, throughout his entire engagement with the Sabbath, he's constantly saying it's not about how you do these practices. It's the why, and it's how the practices are forming you.
Yes.
So if I can understand what is the goal for what this practice will do in my life, and why am I coming at this practice, it doesn't matter about how.
Yes.
It might look different, and that's okay. But as long as my heart is going in the way of understanding what this is forming in me, then it allows for that. So a lot of these are are practices that we might have heard of before. And I tried to use like the traditional names for it, because then it's like, whoa, fasting, solitude.
Yes.
Like, I'm not used to it being in this format. But then it's ultimately about, how do I get to the base of what these are meant to do in my life?
Yes.
And how do I apply it in this movement kind of thing?
Well, taking a fresh look at it.
Yes.
It's like reviving something that maybe was old and stale and saying like, this is still relevant.
Yeah.
And you're also, because it's so interesting, like, we all have spiritual practices. Even if we don't call them that, we all have rhythms. We have routines. And either we're conscious of them and we're being intentional, or we're not. And so you're kind of saying, what if we're, really reviving these practices, making them intentionally spiritual, and then embodying them so that we can have a more whole life.
Yeah, exactly.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's just been fun. Like, part of how I went about with this project was like, I had to do a lot of research aspect.
Yeah. Yes.
So, did a lot of research, because there's not many books on this intersection.
Right.
I think I found one book from like the 90s, Spiritual Direction and the Gay Person by James Emperour, who I actually had the opportunity to interview. I hunted him down in a retirement home for priests.
No way.
I did.
Amazing.
I was like, I need to talk to this man, because he's the only one who
he's
has
like the granddaddy.
Yeah. It came out in the early 90s, and I read it and I just devoured it. And then I was like, I have to interview this man. Wow. So I did the whole investigation online, where I found someone who had written a book with him before, who was a lot younger, was still at a university. I messaged that person.
Amazing.
That person got me in touch with someone else. Then finally I was emailing with James Emperour, and I was like, can we find a time to like talk over the phone, and I'll record it? Because I want to interview you. And it was so amazing to like, he's in this retirement home for Catholic priests.
Wow.
And getting to talk with him about this book he wrote in the 90s. Who wrote this book because he had done spiritual direction with so many
And he was like,
gay
I
men.
need to write and share. And yes.
How to help people
gorgeous.
and walk with LGBT people, especially gay people, and just the beautiful things that he wrote. But beyond that book, and then Eve Tushnet's book, Tenderness, which came out while I was working on this.
Brand new.
Nothing else was in this section, was in this intersection.
Such a void for this. Yeah.
So like I ended up having to do like what I talked about with Velvet Rage and Emotional Healthy Spirituality, and then go where is the overlap? But then I ended up doing case studies of doing spiritual direction with people. And it was cool to learn and see as they engaged with the spiritual practices, like what was helpful for them and what wasn't. And and even it helped me form some of these movements, because some of these movements were not necessarily exactly the same before. So entitlement to humility really got shaped in those case studies because of experiences the case studies were having. But being able to then see, how is this actually relating to people's experiences?
Wow.
Yeah.
I so appreciate your like chasing it down, you know, like this doesn't exist, and I'm going to figure out how to create more of this thing that needs more voice and more, space to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that they always say, like with a doctorate, you want to find something that, you would love to find something that no one else is doing to contribute to it. But obviously in our world, that's not always really, you're contributing to something. So it's that weird frustration, but also that joy when you're doing doctoral work and you're like, oh, no one actually really has engaged with this. And that's both annoying.
Definitely. And kind of cool. Yeah. And that it was rooted in your need.
Yeah.
It's almost like they say, like, be the person that you needed, and so now you're literally creating the work, or you're standing on the shoulders of some others who have, but you're really creating a new voice and a new space for the work that you needed when you were going through this formation.
Oh my, even seriously, which I'm going to use probably clips of it in this like thing of like our interview from Life on Side B when we did that. The person I was then, which was even just halfway through at the time of learning to engage my own shame, learning to engage the pains of my heart, the resentment, which is still just such a journey.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And like, seeing the person I was at the beginning of this project is a completely different Josh.
Yes.
And that's like So, like, I don't know. It just brings up so many emotions.
Yes.
Because this is not where I thought my life would be.
Interesting.
And yet so gloriously happy.
Oh, wow.
Of where it's at.
Yes.
Because, you know, there have been so many pains along the way, but there's been so much beauty that's come out of it. And being able to engage with hard spaces as a much more holistic person. And seeing that, like, I just think what I've learned so much more is that the gospel is so much about us being integrated integrated with God, integrated with ourselves, you know, that there's ways that this world and life just wants us to hide and break apart and separate. But like the gospel is about bringing us into the light, and the gospel is about allowing ourselves to be known and seen, and in a way that we are actually like receiving.
That's transformative. Like you're saying, like you are integrating as you've been on this journey. And now it's like we will always be integrating. But you've tasted it, and you're like, oh, this feels whole. I feel more whole. Because I've left some of this shame, or because I've even, if we go into the first movement, you've dignified the shame. You've brought dignity and compassion to yourself instead of living in shame. Which is good news.
It's good news.
I
mean, I ultimately think that's what Jesus is getting at in John 3 when he's saying, you know, sin and shame, they want to make us hide. They want us to live in the darkness. But he's like, I'm here to bring people into the light. I'm here to allow it to be known and seen. All of the things that you're putting in the dark, let's turn the lights on. And let's see it. And like, we have such this idea of like, I have to have it all together before I can come into the light. But like Jesus is saying the complete opposite. He's like, just come into the light. And that's it. Like just come in. And that is actually what forms us. That is actually what helps us to bring things together and to find a way forward. That like, it's not about, you know, behaving better or believing the right things. Like those are good things. Those are important things, but it's about, how do I listen to the Spirit? How do I behold the glory of God in a way that allows for me to understand that by seeing God, I see who God created me to be, and I see the divine image in my own life, and I can see that that is good.
Which then makes you want to love yourself more, which actually transforms your behaviors.
And then it all actually happens.
Instead of I hate myself and I'm ashamed, therefore my behaviors are motivated out of that. But actually I am loved by love, which is so dignifying. Which then you want to care for yourself. You want to care for others. It like is actually transformative.
100%. And that's what's led this whole journey.
That is so cool.
And
I love it.
I'm excited.
Gives me chills.
Same. It's, again, I just can't believe it's to this point of actually getting to share it. You know?
Wow.
Great. At the end of each episode, I would like to take some time to directly speak with pastors, spiritual directors, and anyone walking alongside LGBT Christians in their spiritual formation. Throughout the episodes, you will hear me addressing the movements towards LGBT people themselves. And if you're listening to improve how to walk alongside queer Christians, everything we share is applicable. But here, I want to give some specific thoughts on how it looks like to care for LGBT people in these movements. When I was speaking with Sarah Patterson, we talked about the dynamics around spiritual direction. One of the most difficult parts for each of us, regardless of your position or role, is letting go of control. We have to recognize the responsibility we have as spiritual directors and pastors.
Realizing as I became a spiritual director that I become one of the stewards of someone else's spiritual formation. And so now there's a sphere of influence.
We have many times convinced ourselves that our responsibility as leaders means we need to tell directees and those in our care what to do. You will probably ask yourself many times as you listen to this podcast, but when will we tell them how to identify or how to act or not act sexually? You may be frustrated to find out that will not come. Our greatest tool in all of this will be listening and curious questions. Our influence and responsibility means we have to be extra careful not to speak from our own motivations, but rather listen to the Spirit.
And so I actually can't do much. It's not my job other than to, I hope, be a really, really non-judgmental, helpful, compassionate listening presence. And there is movement.
Yeah.
It's amazing when I can give that gift to someone and they're just so appreciative, and I don't feel I've done much at all, but I'm just kind of watching the Holy Spirit work. Yeah, in my everyday life, I'm a great advice giver. I can tell you exactly what you need to do, and I'm not allowed to do that. And I use the word allowed on purpose, because that doesn't serve the person. It doesn't serve the other. It gets in the way. Yeah, a lot of biting of the tongue.
We will talk throughout the upcoming series about practices that can be advised, encouragements that can be given, but nothing will beat the power of presence, listening, and curiosity. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will be diving into the movement of shame to dignity. The first song in this episode is Not As Easy As It Seemed by Elijah Herrel, and the song that is playing now is Surrounding You by Paradise Hymns. You can learn more about my practice and work at holyourselves.org, WHOLLY ourselves.org. I provide one-on-one spiritual direction, cohort groups, and more. Special thanks to Sarah Claire Smith Colling for participating in this project. Also, a special thanks to Sarah Patterson and to the Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender for allowing me to use clips from their Christian Sexuality video series. Go check out their work at centerforfaith.com.